To be this difference between what men want and what they actually do. So I'm just wondering, just to start off with, can policies really help bridge that back gap?
Well, I think they can, and it's clear that they do, but the big caveat is they've got to be well-designed policies. Any old policy will not do. We have any old policy in the UK and it doesn't do. It doesn't work. Whereas, if, for example, you take Sweden, but other countries can also be counted, they have very well-designed policies, and you find that men take leave. I won't take Sweden, but if you take the example of Iceland, which creates a lot of interest in the parental leave field. And by the way, you can find information about policies in a wide range of countries on the website of the International Network on Leave Policies, of which we are all members, and every year we produce a review on policy in all the participating countries over 40. So if you want to just check up how it's done in Mexico or Iceland or Japan, then you can just go on to www.leavenetwork.org and all will be revealed to you. But if you look, for example, at Iceland, which went from a rather chaotic system in the early 2000s to a system which is 3 plus 3 plus 3. So 3 months of leave for fathers, 3 months of leave for women, and 3 months of leave for the parents to divide between themselves, all paid at 80% of earnings. And I raise that, first of all, because almost immediately after that was introduced, men began to take 3 months of leave. And they have continued to do so, that they take their 3 months, in other words. So we know that if you have well-paid father-only non-transferable leave, in most cases, not all, it is used. So that sort of model of 3 plus 3 plus 3 could be adapted. The Icelanders themselves are looking at a 5 plus 5 plus 2, 5 for mothers, 5 for fathers, 2 for the family. But that idea, I think, where there is an equal amount for both men and women is very important. Again, stress this is a statutory right. So in that case, employers can add bits, but actually the onus is not put on employers, because if you put the onus on employers, you have got a recipe for rampant inequality, given we have a very unequal labour market. So I would want to stress over and over again, this is primarily a social, political responsibility which employers can support, rather than being an employer's responsibility that the state can support. It's the wrong way around. The caveat I would add, why it doesn't always work, is I think there also has to be a culture, a politics of equality. And I think if you look at countries like Iceland and Sweden, over decades there has been a strong political debate about the need for equality in everything. So when you put in place the right design policy, then people tend to work with it. Now if you look at Japan, which has been described by OECD as having the most advanced parental leave in the world in terms of encouraging fathers, hardly any men take it. And arguably that's because in Japan there has simply not been a politics and a culture about equality. Workplaces don't expect men to take it, men don't expect, all of that. So I would say you need the right design policies, but you also need to do the political cultural work in the society as a whole towards emphasising the importance of equality. And if I just make a final gripe, I've said we don't have a well-designed leave policy, and to me that's epitomised by the fact that we have something called shared parental leave, which is not parental leave at all. It is actually transferable maternity leave. And that's a completely different kettle of fish. It's a leave, a right for women, which they may choose to transfer to their partners. Parental leave has to be equally available to men and women. We have that, though hardly anybody ever talks about it or uses it. We have 4 months unpaid parental leave for men and women. That is genuine parental leave. It's just not used, partly because, of course, it's not paid.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm just thinking about the benefits. We've already talked there about the gender pay gap, and that's something I know is on many employers' minds. Is there any evidence to show that actually introducing good parental leave has an impact on gender pay gap, or where are you as far as that evidence?
Well, I'm not aware of any direct, my colleagues may know better than me, but I'm not aware of any evidence that directly connects the two. And of course, again, it's that usual problem of causality. If you have, as in Sweden, perhaps well-paid parental leave, which is widely used, the gender pay gap may be greater or lesser, but no doubt there are lots of other things going on in Sweden which has created the policy in the first place. And of course you have to look at the way the labour market is structured, etc. I'm very dubious of these kind of magic bullet things. You know, if you introduce this, bingo, that will happen. Life, it doesn't work like that. I would see well-structured parental leave as part of something much bigger, and that you shouldn't think that that is going to kind of cure all the problems. So I would say that we need parental leave that is well designed, but it also needs to be seen, just slotted into something much bigger. For example, give two obvious examples. Parental leave needs to dovetail with an entitlement to early childhood education and care. So if I can take your example of Sweden. In Sweden, well-paid parental leave is roughly 13 months. But children in Sweden, not parents, children in Sweden are entitled to a place in a very good preschool from 12 months of age. So in other words, there is no gap. Now if you look at this country, and it's true as much as Scotland as in England, well-paid leave, which is 6 weeks maternity leave, ends almost before it begins. And then there is nearly a 3-year gap before you get any sort of entitlement, universal entitlement to early childhood education and care. And we are not alone in that. Most countries like that. One reason being that government that deals with parental leave tends to be in kind of business, labour, social affairs. And the people who deal with early childhood tend to be in education, children's services, and never the twain meet. So typically when we talk about parental leave, you will not find anybody from, if you like, children's services, including education perspective. So yeah, that's one obvious example. The other obvious example about the gender pay gap is you need to really build up, I would say, a life course approach to leave. That's why our new book is called Parental Leave and Beyond. Parental leave is very important, but it only deals with quite a small part of, admittedly rather demanding part of life, but that part of life when people have youngish children. And we have to move, I think, quite rapidly, if we're not going to run into a big crisis of care, which is looming, to developing life course approaches. For example, in Belgium, they have a time credit system in which, I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but the idea is very interesting, that every employee has an amount of time that they can draw down throughout their life for all sorts of reasons. It's paid, not very generously, but the principle, again, might help us to begin to think about a life course approach. So in a way, I think the problem is in this country, because we haven't got parental leave right, we spend acres of time going on about parental leave, of course, and instead of fixing it, we keep bungling it. And that's stopping us moving on to the much bigger question is how can we structure our societies so that we move to a much more equitable relationship between gender, employment and care in all sorts of fields, and care very broadly defined, not just childcare and elder care, but care of the self, care of the society and care of the environment.
Thank you so much, Peter.
When all these policies started to be introduced in Sweden, beginning of the 70s, it was really because there was a demand of labour. Women had to work because there was not enough people working in Sweden. So, and that kind of has caught on, I think, that you need these central policies for having a large workforce, but also the companies and employers, they need to attract labour, and they need to have labour that can stay. And you only stay if you have good policies, if you can go home early, if your child is sick and so on. and so on. And I think, especially in the 80s and the 90s, many of the big Swedish companies, they had policies like top up on the parental leave, for example, to attract labor or to make labor stay, especially with men then that were in, or that had incomes that would not that would make the parental leave benefit from the state, not cover their whole income. So it was a way of attracting labor. So it's really that, I think. So this is the cultural thing. I think that you talk about it in the other way. You talk about gender equality needed for a profitable company, but also for society. I think maybe that's the main difference. And maybe also I want to say that it's very much an individual. Sweden is a very individual society, so everything is individual. Pension, the sick leave, the parental leave, and all these things. So also men see that they become parents and they get this individual right to half of the parental leave. Then they can give away part of that parental leave to the mother if they want to. Here we talk about women giving to fathers, but actually you become parents and you get information and okay, I became a parent, I get 8 months of parental leave. I can give that some of it to the mother if I want to, but I don't want to give away all this. This is my individual rights. 3 months I can't give away, neither the mother or the father. But many men, I think, and increasingly so, think that this is my individual right. Why would I give it away? I'm needed as a father too, so I will use this right. So it's both this that is profitable and that is individual, I think are important factors here.
And you continually top the league as far as gender equality is concerned. So what is there to go for next?
One thing, actually, there was a debate just the other night on the news in Sweden, and between the gender equality minister and the opposition, one of the opposition leaders, and he talked about women's sick leave being the main argument for fathers having to be home more. So if father steps in, then mothers don't have this double burden and they can be at work more. So again, this is something we have a big problem with, the pressure and everything that makes women more often than men being home for a long time on sick leave for just having too much to do. And the way to solve this was for fathers to step in. That's what they've said, both of them. Of course, they have different ideas of how to do this, but so we do have problems, certainly, yes.
And what's next as far as the focus is concerned for government, do you believe?
Well, there was a commission that came out a year ago on how to reform the parental leave, and they actually suggested a system of, now we have 3 months daddy's quotas and 3 months mother's quota that you have to use or it's forfeited. They suggested to have 5 months, so 5 months to the father, 5 months to the mother, and 5 months to share however you want. And among these 5 months that you can share how you want, 2 months you could give to someone else. So that was really to open up for other kind of family forms as well. And I think that this will, we also have a problem with having a government, but I think that this is part of the government at the moment wants to go for this, increasing the quotas in the systems. But they're also talking about reducing the flexibility, because that's another part of the Swedish system, that it's so flexible. You can actually use the parental leave up to the child is 12 years old. So if you don't want to use your whole leave before the kid starts daycare, you can have longer summer holidays and so on during the whole preschool years. And of course that's very nice for the parents, but it might not be so nice for the companies, because it's very unpredictable when someone's off and so on. And you will have some people always saying that, okay, I cannot work this Christmas or so because I have my parental leave to use. So actually there seems to be a reduction. That seems to be the trend to reduce this flexibility. So employers are maybe saying that it's very nice and it's good for parents, but maybe it's a little too hard for us to deal with this. Yeah.
And Alison, I know that last year you had the fortunate opportunity to go out and spend your sabbatical over in Sweden. What do you think Scotland can learn? Peter was saying that we haven't got a great deal at the moment, but what do you think we can do with what we've got? And what did you see within Sweden that you think that we can do better here in the UK?
Oh, lots. Working hours comes to mind straight away, and I have changed my working hours pattern since coming back. inspired by Swedish colleagues. So maybe it's about, and you pointed to this already with your presentation, that many people aren't aware of what's available. So whilst our UK statutory policy is not great, I completely concur with Peter on that. There is quite a lot that people don't know about. I think it's very common that people are totally unaware of unpaid parental leave. And then, of course, that's the statutory, and so employers can potentially top up. But also on the basics of paternity leave and maternity leave. So just making sure that you know what the current policy is, and it does change from time to time as employers, so that you can then communicate that to your employees, and that we know that's not happening. Just knowing, and I felt in Sweden that there was a stronger sense of knowing what your entitlements as individuals, and I suppose also through the employers. So knowing what you have, knowing that you can also claim quite a lot of the statutory pay back from HMRC. I get the impression that some employers are not aware that they cannot even claim it back. I don't know. I think as well, being aware maybe, given how bad our statutory policies are, what the unintended consequences of that can be for your employees. So, such as we know that fathers take annual leave rather than paternity leave in the absence of top-ups. A student of mine's doing a dissertation at the moment, and quote from one of the interviews he did, a bit heartbreaking. One of the dads he spoke to had booked, new dad, first baby, had booked annual leave ready for the date of the birth, but of course births aren't always that predictable, they don't always come on time. And the baby didn't meet the annual leave, and then he hadn't got the time to take to put on the birth, and hadn't been aware of paternity leave, of the statutory paternity leave. So also being aware not just of the statutory, but what the implications might be for your employers, I think, employees. I really like to point on the primary caregiving model as well. I think that some of our policy does definitely reinforce that, but not all of it. So again, being aware of what's available towards encouraging a co-parenting or co-caregiving model. Yeah, and also eligibility, I think. That's a big difference from Sweden and here. So one of our colleagues, Margaret O'Brien, she did some work in the UK, and I found it quite surprising that of workers, I think it's about 19% of mothers, about 26% of fathers, of working mothers and fathers, are not eligible for the basic statutory maternity and paternity entitlements and shared parental leave entitlements. It's higher for fathers being in, of course, because their eligibility for shared parental leave depends on the mother's eligibility. So, and in Sweden you have a universal entitlement model, and it's a first day service as well, isn't it? So there's not a length of service requirement that we have. First day of work, what's the phrase you use?
Well, everyone who lives in Sweden or works in Sweden are eligible to leave, but to have it earnings related, you need to have worked 8 months before using leave. But
Yeah, we've just finished a piece of work on self-employed fathers, which is going to be coming out, and that was fascinating. And the long hours that they work, I can't take any leave, and that was really, really clear. So obviously self-employed, and that seems to be a growing proportion of the labour force.
Yes, yeah. So in other countries, self-employed mothers and fathers are covered by statutory maternity and paternity. Not every country, but and it's linked to your funding model as well. So are you funded through social insurance? In Sweden, I understand you receive your payment, which varies, directly from the social insurance agency, not via the employer. So you cut out the employer having to claim it back, and that clearly affects employers' relationship with payment.
We've got a little bit of time for questions from the audience, just for 5 or so minutes.
Yep.
Because it's such a great opportunity to be able to ask questions. Otherwise, I've got lots more questions.
I was wondering if there was any information where you say there are fathers that can give up part of their leave and then share that back with the mother. Do we find in the countries you're talking about that fathers do take their entitlement, or do you see a pattern of, even in those models, the fathers give up their leave to the mothers, so the mothers actually end up taking more?
I think it's very clear that if you offer father-only leave, well-paid fathers take it, and then when it comes to something labelled family, they don't. So if you look at Iceland, which I was an example, very clear, 3 months fathers take, 3 months mothers take, the family leave, 90% is taken by mothers. So that is why I think both in Iceland and I suspect in Sweden, that the thinking is moving towards a sort of 5 plus 5 plus a reasonable period for men, a reasonable period for women, and a diminishing period for the family, because otherwise you just end up reproducing inequality.
But I do think it's important how you inform the parents about this. So in Sweden you're informed that, okay, you became a father or a mother and you got 8 months of parental leave. You have the right to give that away to the other parent if you want to. So if you want to do that as a father, if you don't want to use your 8 months, you can give it to the mother, but you have to sign. You have to sign that the mother can use my leave, part of the leave. So, and this happens in most cases. Mothers still use much longer leave than fathers. But it's a very conscious decision in that you have to go in electronically, of course, but you have to go in and actually give it to someone else. And of course that makes you think more than that this just happens, or first that it wants to use it just takes all of it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We've got time for one or two.
Well, I was just commenting on that point. I think it's brilliant where you're talking about that the leave can be allocated to someone else, because modern families are made up in all kinds of different ways. So I just wondered how that works. Is it, if that's someone else, is it have to be another family member, like a grandparent, or can you get that as a financial thing that you can pay for care? Or
So actually that's just a proposition at the moment, so we don't have that for the parental leave, but the point was that maybe if you have someone, if you're maybe a single parent, or if you have someone else close that would be suitable to look after it, you have the right to do that. And then it's you as a parent who can dedicate that other person. This doesn't have to be a specific person. But we also have, I think the most generous part of the Swedish system is actually the leave when you can be home with your child. When the child has started daycare, and you can be home when the kid is sick, so the kid cannot go to daycare, and you can be home to take care of the kid. That you actually have 120 days per child in Sweden every year, so an 80% replacement. That's used on average like maybe 5 days for every child every year. So parents don't use it at all as much as they can. But that can also be given away to grandparents or close friends or someone else that if you have a job that it's hard to be away from when your child is sick, you can give that to someone else. And that's used sometimes, but maybe not as much as it should.
I think in Norway you can sign the leave to another person to share if you want to.
I was just thinking about Sam's point about looking at fathers and self-employment, and in Scotland I think the figure is something like 99% of private organisations are SMEs, so they're small organisations that employ just over 50% of the private sector workforce in Scotland. So that's a whole other dynamic, isn't it? If somebody's working in a small organisation, there's not naturally somebody to cover their role. They might have to, I had to do this, and having that flexibility to pay for care as and when would be a major factor. I should have moved to Sweden.
So I think self-employed, they are the ones, both women and men are the ones using the leave the least in Sweden. So that's a big, it's not really set up for self-employment. Also in Sweden, it's a problem, I'd say. Because, not so much because of the payments, but more for who's going to do the job. And someone to have your shop open or whatever it is.
Can I just, because Alison's raised the point about eligibility, and it seems to me, looking across countries, that the two big issues in policy and research at present is, first of all, getting fathers to use more, and the other one is increasingly, in recent years, eligibility. Because in a way, it's suddenly dawning on people that in some countries, eligibility is not very extensive. So something like Canada, I think it is, when you look at this, it turns out only about 2/3 of the workforce are eligible. Once you begin to look at the small print. So there's quite a lot of work now going on, and our colleague Margaret O'Brien is just finishing a study for the European Institute of Gender Equality on the whole question of eligibility in EU member states and estimating how much, what proportion of the workforce are eligible. And there's also a very interesting discussion, partly reflected in our book, about whether we should be rethinking the whole leave area, moving away from the idea that it's somehow an employment benefit and regulation, towards it being a universal right to care, which in a way then removes you entirely from this sort of question. Because if it's an employment right, you get bogged down in this thing of how long should they have worked and blah, 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 blah. But if you begin to think about it, that people should, that society and people should have the right to care for a certain period, then you change a lot of those things. So it seems to me eligibility is coming up as a really big question.
I'm sure the lawyers in the room as well will be interested to hear that too. Thank you so much. I think that timing
We
is
are
just
right on time.
absolutely perfect.
Indeed.